Live from Studio B in downtown Little Rock, this is a special report from KARK4 and Fox 16. Fired sheriff's deputy on trial. Here's breaking news anchor Mitch McCoy.
And good day to you. We're coming across our digital platforms for a special report. We're just getting word that a jury has found former Lonoke County Sheriff Sergeant Michael Davis guilty on negligent homicide charges, not guilty on manslaughter. This is a case that has grabbed the state's attention and, quite frankly, the country. Of course, 17-year-old Hunter Brittain, you see his picture there on the side of your screen. He is the 17-year-old unarmed teenager that was shot and killed by the former Lonoke County Sheriff's Sergeant back last year, summertime, during a traffic stop. I want to bring you now to live pictures outside that courtroom where we have seen a little bit of activity from that area. I want to give you a perspective on what's happening there. We are awaiting the judge's sentencing decision. This is something that the judge will be looking at. She'll be looking at the penalty part of all of this. But at the end of the day, the judge will be making that final decision on how much time, if any time, Sergeant Michael Davis will spend behind bars. You can see the activity that is outside the courthouse, people hugging each other, and it will be one of these moments to watch because negligent homicide is a lesser charge than manslaughter, the charge that he was originally faced with by the Lonoke County, by a special prosecutor there in Lonoke County. I do want to correct myself. I don't necessarily know if the judge is doing the sentencing part, but this is the sentencing phase that is underway right now in Lonoke County. Our reporter is inside the courtroom. Cameras are banned there, so we don't know. We're only getting updates when the reporter can leave the room, but based off of the emotions that we're seeing outside the courthouse there, you can see that people are emotional. Obviously, this has been a day that they have been waiting for some time. As we await what the decision is when it comes to sentencing, I want to get to our legal analyst here, Kelly Ward. She is a former prosecutor. She's now a defense attorney. Kelly Ward, good morning to you. I'm interested in your take on this because you this morning on KARK4 Today, you mentioned this, with them adding that negligent homicide charge as an available option, it could complicate things somewhat in just the jury's decision, and it gives the jury more options than originally they thought.
Well, yes, I think I explained the process of, how a jury is instructed to consider a lesser included offense. It's not a simple process of, okay, which charge do we like best? They have to actually consider the top charge, which in this case was manslaughter, and then all make a unanimous decision that they do not believe that Michael Davis was guilty of manslaughter before they go down to the lesser included offense of negligent homicide. So it sounds from the verdict that that's what happened, that they ultimately went down to that negligent homicide and found that he was guilty of that lesser included offense.
And can you, if you can, kind of explain to people the difference here between manslaughter and negligent homicide? Because negligent homicide has a very serious tone to it, but the negligent homicide is a misdemeanor. It is not a felony compared to a manslaughter charge.
That's correct. And these are actually, when you said explain the difference, negligent and reckless are very, they're hard concepts for attorneys to grasp and then explain to a jury, and then the judge instructing the jury and the jury going through the instructions back in the deliberation. So the difference between manslaughter and negligent homicide in the statute is the mental state. The mental state in manslaughter is reckless. Did someone act recklessly in causing the death of another person? For negligent homicide, the mental state is negligent. And that's something more than what you hear in civil cases where, and maybe if a car ran a stop sign and hit another car, you might say, well, they were negligent. It's a different type of negligence in a criminal case. It's sometimes been described as super negligence. And basically it's the failure to perceive a known and unjustifiable risk. So when you look at reckless definition, and I don't want to get too technical, but the reckless definition is a conscious disregard of a known and substantial risk. So negligence would be failure to perceive that risk. So, I mean, when you're explaining these to the jury, it can get kind of cumbersome because the definitions have a bunch of legal terms in them. But ultimately, the jury thought that it was a negligent act rather than a reckless act. So what that means is they convicted him of an A misdemeanor. An A misdemeanor carries a sentence of up to 1 year in jail and a fine of up to $2,500. Whereas if you look at the manslaughter, the felony, which was what was charged, the top charge, it is a C felony, which would carry punishment of 3 years to 10 years in the Department of Corrections and a fine of up to $10,000. So there's a substantial difference in the penalty here. Now, when the jury was deliberating in the guilt phase, they never are supposed to consider sentencing. In fact, they don't know what the range is on each charge or the lesser includeds, and they're specifically instructed not to consider sentencing in the guilt phase. So they only consider whether or not the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt the offense and find it guilty or not guilty. Now, what they're doing in the second phase and what they're about to get started would be the sentencing phase, where the state and the defense can put on evidence for the jury to consider when they're coming up with what the sentence will be.
And so walk us through what's likely happening inside that courtroom where they are ultimately deciding the sentencing phase. Is this going to be primarily the jury's decision? Is this going to be jury and judge decision? Is this solely going to be on the judge? Does the judge have to approve the jury's decision? Kind of walk us through what you know about that.
Okay, so in Arkansas, we're one of the few states that still has jury sentencing. And so what happens and what usually happens and what's probably happening in Lonoke is that the state is preparing to put on sentencing witnesses. And those witnesses are likely going to be family members, friends, just whoever the state and the family has determined they'll put on as witnesses to tell the jury how this has impacted them, how it's impacted their family. They might talk about Hunter and basically just tell the jury that this is how these actions have impacted our lives. They can put on any type of evidence about the defendant as well. This is the phase where they might be able to put on evidence that they couldn't put on in the guilt phase. Any sort of prior acts, which I don't believe there are any in this case, but it is allowed to put on prior convictions, that sort of thing, but that would not come into play in this case. And then the defense would put on what we call mitigation evidence. They put on evidence about Michael Davis, about things that he's done in his life to show the jury of their side of what they believe sentencing should be. So both sides are probably preparing for that. They're also probably going through jury instructions on sentencing. So the judge would read a second set of jury instructions to the jury on what type of evidence they can consider for sentencing, what the sentencing range is, and then the sentencing verdict form. So that kind of goes to your question as to what is happening. Your second question about who's the ultimate sentencer. In Arkansas, as I stated, we do have jury sentencing, but a jury sentence is a recommendation, and we always say the judge is the ultimate sentencer. Now, does the judge depart what we call depart from the jury sentencing? That's very rare. They can do it, but it is very, very, very rare. I've never actually, in all my trials, I've never had a judge depart from a recommendation by the jury. So the judge holds the ultimate sentencing power, but the jury makes a recommendation, and then the judge will I would say in 99% of all cases, go with that recommendation.
If you're just joining us this morning, we are following breaking news out of Cabot, where a decision has just been made. The jury ultimately finding that former Lonoke County Sheriff Sergeant Michael Davis, he will be found guilty of negligent homicide, not guilty of manslaughter. Good day to you. I'm Mitch McCoy here in Studio B as we're bringing you live breaking news coverage. Kelly Ward, a legal expert, is joining us now live. She is a former prosecutor. She's now a defense attorney, and she's giving us a perspective of all of this, specifically how things might be playing out inside that courtroom as we now await the former deputy's sentencing order, and that should be coming down. I want to give you a perspective, though, as to what is likely happening inside this courtroom. What we have been seeing now is this really makeshift courtroom where they are at the Cabot Readiness Center. This is a larger venue than the Lonoke County Circuit Court building, and most of the people in that courtroom have been using folding chairs, and there's a classroom off to the side where the jury has been deliberating, and these have been closed door meetings. Only the jury is allowed in there, and they started deliberating last night for a couple of hours, and then Kelly, they started meeting again at 9, and then just before the top of the hour at 10 o'clock, we got word that the jury had come back and that they had that not guilty verdict on manslaughter, guilty on negligent homicide. And we are now in that sentencing phase. There are no cameras are allowed in the courtroom. Live tweeting is not allowed in the courtroom. Of course, Twitter is a pretty good way for us to get information from our reporter in the courtroom, but that has been banned. So we only have the opportunity to get updates from the reporter when the reporter ultimately leaves the courtroom. Of course, the reporter is not going to leave the courtroom while the sentencing is ongoing. You're looking at live pictures right now from outside the Cabot Readiness Center, where you can see family members comforting each other. I don't know on which side of the family these members are. I don't know if these are Hunter Brittain's family or potentially Michael Davis's family. But we will, this is one of the cameras that we have there in Cabot monitoring outside the courthouse, or excuse me, the Cabot Readiness Center, now courthouse. There's a couple different moments that I do want to stand by and wait for, and that is going to be when the sentencing is ultimately over and we can get some reaction coming in from both Hunter Brittain's family and the defense's family. You know, this is going to be an interesting perspective on where everybody stands with the jury's verdict, because when you look at the motives that Hunter Brittain's family wanted, the verdict's decision is a misdemeanor. It is not the manslaughter charge that the prosecutor originally filed against former Sergeant Michael Davis. When you have the defense, you know, they may not be happy here with this negligent homicide charge. That'll be interesting to see the reaction from the former deputy's defense team. Kelly Ward, can you give us a perspective here? Because this is a lesser charge. This is a lesser serious offense, negligent homicide, than manslaughter. I could see, and of course I'm just assuming here, I could see some people not happy across the board with the decision. The defense not happy with the fact that it's negligent homicide, and then Hunter Brittain's family not happy that it's not manslaughter. Of course, we'll have to wait and see, but this was kind of a meet in the middle decision.
Well, you know, you'll hear attorneys talk about sometimes, oh, this was a compromise verdict. But I don't really subscribe to that philosophy. I believe that jurors, when they deliberate, they follow the instructions of the judge, and they consider a lesser included in the manner in which it's supposed to be considered. So while there is, you'll hear attorneys talk about compromises that happen in the jury room, I tend to believe that they follow the instructions as the judge read them to them, and they come to their decision. So, while it's not the top charge, it's a conviction. So I guess we can only speculate how it's being received by both sides. Once the sentencing phase starts, you're going to probably hear a little bit about that. I mean, not necessarily their opinion of the verdict, but you'll be able to see, the reaction of the defendant and the sentencing witnesses, which will most likely be family members. So I think it just depends on how it's received, but it is a conviction. And I was also going to add that, and that I forgot to add earlier, that a misdemeanor offense can be eligible for alternative sanctions, but that's up to the judge. So alternative sanctions can include fines, probation, community service, those sorts of things. But that is ultimately up to the judge whether she gives the jury what we call an alternative sanction instruction. So since we don't know what's going on in the courtroom and what instructions are going to be ultimately given, we don't know the answer to that question yet.
What would those instructions look like? Would you, I guess, what would those instructions be?
So we have in Arkansas, we have the Arkansas Model Criminal Jury Instructions, the AMCI, and it's the instructions are put together by a panel that's appointed every year to review criminal jury instructions and make any changes that need to be made. But ultimately, the instruction is supposed to instruct the jury clearly and concisely on what the law in Arkansas is, whether it's the law on manslaughter, it's the law on self-defense, it's the law on a sentencing or a sentencing range. The instructions are very well thought out, and they're the same. You have to use these AMCI, Arkansas Model Criminal Jury Instructions, in every criminal trial. In fact, to get an instruction that's not a model instruction, you have to file motions and you have to write briefs and you have to jump through a bunch of hoops, and then the judge has to ultimately grant an attorney's motion to have an instruction read to the jury that is not one of the model instructions. So typically you don't see any instructions that are not model instructions. So what they're looking at right now are the Arkansas Model Jury Instructions on sentencing when it comes to what evidence is allowed at sentencing. There's an instruction that tells the jury, okay, you're going to hear evidence for sentencing now. This is evidence that you can consider when you come to your sentencing verdict. And then they'll get an instruction on what the range of punishment is. For the alternative sanctions instruction, there is an instruction that specifically says you have the ability to consider alternative sanctions, which could include probation. But it's up to the judge whether or not he or she wants to give that instruction. I assume, the defense is asking for that instruction on alternative sanctions, and I also assume that the state is probably objecting to it because that's just normally how it works. Of course, we don't know that, and that's just an assumption. But I assume the defense is probably asking for that instruction, and ultimately the judge will have to make a decision on whether to allow that instruction or not. If she does not allow it, the options will be up to 1 year in jail, and that would be a county jail, not the Department of Corrections, which is the Arkansas Department of Corrections. The prison system is totally different thing. So up to 1 year in jail and or a fine of up to $2,500. So they could do just fine. They could do jail and fine. They could do just jail. I mean, those are the options if there's not an alternative sanctions instruction.
And so the judge is really going to be looking at the fact that former Sergeant Michael Davis served in law enforcement. That's going to be taken into consideration here when deciding on if he's actually going to be spending any time behind bars, right? I mean, they're going to take in his.
I'm not sure. It just depends on the case. It depends on the evidence that came out during the guilt phase. That's another thing that the instructions will tell the jury is you can consider all the evidence you've heard throughout the trial, even in the guilt phase, when in rendering your sentencing verdict. So, there are some judges, in my experience, that never give the alternative sanctions instruction, and then there are some that give it frequently, and then there are some that are in the middle, and it just depends on the case. So we'll just have to wait and see what the judge's decision is in this case.
We are looking here at live pictures as it would appear that we might have some people holding up signs, obviously. Supporters for Hunter.
Justice for Hunter. Justice for Hunter.
Now chanting outside that courtroom.
Justice for Hunter is justice for all. Yes.
What did you think when that verdict came out?
I was not happy. All I wanted from day one is for him to get a felony where he could not be in law enforcement again and carry a weapon. That's all I asked for. We even wanted to let him go with a long-term probation, but we wanted that felony charge. Now what's going to happen? Are people going to have to fear for their life again? Once he gets back, because you know he'll go back to the force.
How are y'all keeping Hunter's story alive after all this?
Right here.
Right here, everybody.
We will continue because
never be forgotten ever.
Hunter meant a lot to all of us, and we all loved him, and we fought for a long time. And he will be with us in our hearts, and I hope everybody will know that and see that as time goes on. And we're not going to forget about Hunter. He's 17 forever, and we love him.
Do you at least feel good about a max sentence? Do you at least feel good about the max sentence in this instance?
Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, what can you do? It is what it is. So we have to accept it.
We don't agree, but we accept.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Justice for Hunter.
Justice for Hunter.
Justice for all.
Justice for Hunter!
Justice for all.
We love you, boy. Thank y'all. We
much.
appreciate y'all putting our story out there and keeping it out there all this time. It means a lot to us.
Yes, thank y'all.
As you're listening to the family react there to Hunter Brittain's family react to the jury's verdict, we're getting more breaking news right now. The sentencing phase is over. The sentencing now 1 year in jail and a $1,000 fine was just put down. The family might be saying
Didn't
more.
get us what we wanted, but I still think that he did a great job and he did all he could to get. It just didn't work out. So, thank y'all.
Of course, the family there saying that the special prosecutor, Jeff Phillips, did everything that he could in getting that felony. The family of Hunter Brittain saying that that is ultimately what they wanted. They wanted a felony, and that is all that they wanted. As we now continue to monitor these live pictures, I've not seen the defense side come out of the courtroom yet. Kelly Ward, your reaction now, that sentencing order just coming down, 1 year in jail, $1,000 fine on the negligent homicide conviction.
And now I guess I didn't mention earlier, and I'm not sure exactly because we weren't in the courtroom. As you mentioned, it's, there's no tweeting or anything. The defense and the prosecutor have the option to waive jury sentencing. I don't know if that happened here. Do you know if that happened here, Mitch?
Not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just seemed very quick, so I wasn't sure if that's what happened. But so the 1 year, that's the maximum for the negligent homicide. There is a difference that we should mention in sentencing. For a misdemeanor rather than sentencing for a felony to the Department of Corrections. As I've already said, a misdemeanor, the term is in the jail, so the county jail, not in the Department of Corrections. So because of that, you don't have the issue of parole. You know, when someone is sentenced to the Department of Corrections, you have the issue of parole eligibility, earning of good time. The parole board can let them out. Let's say, you know, someone gets a sentence of 10 years, the manslaughter 10 years, and this is just hypothetical. They could be earn good time, and their parole eligibility date could come up in 1/6 of 10 years. So, you know, that's what, 20 months. So when a person is sentenced to the county jail, there is no parole award. You know, there's no good time. The jail is responsible for housing that person and then releasing them. So there is a difference there when you're thinking about sentencing for a felony and sentencing for a misdemeanor. Now, I assume a criminal defendant has an absolute right to an appeal, and you know, will there be an appeal? Probably so.
Looking at some new updates coming out just from our reporter there at the courthouse, we are being told that it would appear that Michael Davis's attorney, Robert Newcomb, it appears right now that he is attempting to file an appeal in this case. Not unexpected, but court is now in recess until 11 o'clock. Kelly, with court being in recess now until 11 o'clock, the sentencing phase is over. What left is there to do?
So once the defense attorney files a notice of appeal, it's just a one-page document that says it's notice of appeal. Here's notice to the state of Arkansas, the court, that we intend to file an appeal with the appellate court, whether it goes to the Court of Appeals in Arkansas or the Supreme Court of Arkansas. So once that notice is filed, then they can consider an appeal bond.
Okay. Okay, so it's more or less a formality if they're going to file an appeal?
You have to file the notice of appeal in order to get the appeal started. But once the notice of appeal is filed, then the judge, the defense can ask the judge for an appeal bond, as we saw in the Jesse Smollett case. You know, he received an appeal bond, although he received a jail sentence, and was allowed to bond out pending appeal. So I don't know if, you know, that's good. They're going to ask for an appeal bond in this case, probably so, and that's probably, if his attorney is rushing to file a notice of appeal, they're probably wanting to take up the issue of an appeal bond. But that's just a guess. I don't know that. That is just based on criminal procedure and how it works post-trial.
Yeah, obviously we are not in the courtroom, so we can only go off of the experience and more importantly, your experience in this situation, considering you are a former prosecutor, but now a defense attorney. If you're just joining us, I think now is a good time to just reset. Over the course of the half hour, we have gotten word that former Lonoke County Sheriff Sergeant Michael Davis has been found guilty by a jury of negligent homicide. He has been found not guilty on manslaughter. Negligent homicide is a less serious offense. Negligent homicide is a misdemeanor. It is not a felony compared to a manslaughter charge. The sentencing phase just wrapped up. That's likely why we saw the crowd building outside the courthouse. And we just heard from Hunter Brittain's family. That sentencing phase just wrapped up, and former Deputy Michael Davis has been sentenced to 1 year in jail with a $1,000 fine. But I want to point out the fact that it is not a felony. And I think that is where there has been a lot of, it's been a point of contention amongst Hunter Brittain's family and the defense. But Hunter Brittain's family, as you just heard Hunter Brittain's, I believe, grandmother say, they wanted the felony. The felony is something they were pushing for. They thanked Special Prosecutor Jeff Phillips in the case for doing everything that he could to at least get that negligent homicide conviction. Obviously disappointed that it's not a felony. That's what they wanted. But at this point, former Sergeant Michael Davis has been found guilty on negligent homicide. You know, the point that Kelly, I think, going back to you, Kelly Ward, former prosecutor, now a defense attorney, she's also a partner at Camps and Ward Law Firm here in Little Rock, is the fact that when you look at the wordage, it's up to 1 year in jail. This is not 1 year in prison, it's 1 year in jail. There has been a lot of conversation amongst state lawmakers, especially with COVID in county jails. There's not as much room. This up to 1 year in jail. Do you expect? I mean, just your professional opinion. Obviously, you're not a psychic here, but do you expect him to spend that full 1 year in jail, or because we're talking the county jail level? Or is it too soon to know, maybe?
Right. So I've had different experiences, and I can't, point to any specific statute that controls that. But I've had different experiences around the state with different jails. So I've had clients that are sentenced to a term of jail, 30 days or 60 days or even 1 year, and the jail has the ability to release them after a time which they deem themselves to be adequate. So, so I've had people like in Pulaski County, they may sometimes get 2 days for 1 day, and end up doing 6 months for a 1 year term. Now judges, I've seen judges do this too. They write in their entries, must serve every day. And that goes to the sheriff, and the sheriff is responsible for carrying out the sentence of the judge. So the judge can make that note and, make sure that they serve every single day of that term. So when you're talking about jail rather than prison, rather than the Department of Corrections, there's a lot less, there are a lot less statutes that govern how the sentence is to be carried out. But I have, in my experience, judges will say, must serve every day, no early release, or put language like that to send to the jail with their order of how long the person is supposed to serve. So, we don't know what's going on in this case in the courtroom, but those are various options of how much. And I believe the sentence was 1 year, 365 days is what the sentence was. So 1 year would be the term that he is supposed to serve.
Yeah, wow. Talk about a very interesting, I don't know, looking back at everything and just looking back at kind of what has transpired over the last 24 hours, Kelly, I'll be honest, I'm kind of surprised with last night, the judge asked the jury, do you want to stay or do you want to go? She ultimately dismissed the jury. To come back today, and it only took them, maybe an hour, maybe a little more than an hour to come back on the negligent homicide offense.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so that would be about a total of, we're thinking like 3 hours deliberating, which is about, and what I always say, the average, I would always tell people 3 hours, that is the average time. Sometimes it's sooner, sometimes it's later, but in my experience, around 3 hours is an average. So, it wasn't especially long. It wasn't especially short. It was kind of right in the middle, which tells me, I think, that they were paying very close attention throughout the whole trial, listening to all the evidence and considering it as they went along, and they were ready to deliberate when they got back there.
Yeah, they were. They did not waste any time. It makes you also wonder maybe what the jury was thinking when they went home last night, and having time to process what they saw, process the rules of the order. I want to go to Katrin Asaf. She is there outside. Let's cue in her.
Guard Readiness Center. Now remember that the entire trial of Michael Davis, which really only took 3 days, 10 witnesses, happened behind these doors in a cafeteria that had turned into this courtroom. Now today we got that verdict. He was found not guilty for manslaughter, that is the felony charge, but guilty for the lesser misdemeanor charge of negligent homicide. Now the max sentence is what Davis received, which was 1 year in jail and then a $1,000 fine. You just heard from the family who is out here. They are in trucks, they're holding signs, they put on t-shirts just now that said justice for Hunter, so they're reacting to the news. They tell us that they're not happy that he didn't get that manslaughter charge, but they will accept the current verdict and the sentence, of course, being that max sentence for negligent homicide. We're just waiting for him to come out with his attorney to see if we can get a reaction from him. I will say that the family, you could see his wife kind of put her head down during the sentencing, but we really, inside the courtroom, didn't have a very strong reaction from either family or the jurors or Davis himself. So I think most of the emotions are going to be playing out here. So really, that's what we're seeing here today. Of course, we're going to continue to keep you updated. Right now, we're just waiting for the rest of the attorneys and, of course, Davis himself to come out of these courtroom doors back here.
Katrin, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Kelly Ward, I know that you're going to have to wrap up here in a little bit because you have work to do yourself. But your reaction to what Katrin just said, I think you could hear it. If not, correct me. But the attorney Robert Newcomb and Michael Davis, will Michael Davis come out today, or will he go right into county jail?
Generally, the defendant's taken into custody after the verdict. When they're sentenced to a term of jail or imprisonment, they're taken into custody there in the courtroom and sent, to the jail.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's what we were hearing, that Robert Newcomb was filing a notice of appeal so that he could address an appeal bond. We're not sure. That's one step. Generally, an appeal bond argument you might do it a few days later. It takes in my experiences, I've done it within a couple days after the notice is filed, and the court will set a hearing. But maybe he's trying to get a notice filed and he's asked the judge to hear it today. At this point, we don't know. So we'll just have to wait and see how it all plays out. One thing I noticed, I did hear what Katrin was saying about there being, the little reaction, which is probably something the judge had instructed or the bailiff had told everyone not to react. I've heard that said in the courtroom before verdicts are read many times, and I'm sure that it was the same here. I just hope that I know after sitting with many families of victims who have been killed, the pain of losing a loved one in any manner, regardless of the outcome of any criminal case or any decision, legal decision, is just, the pain is just, it's devastating. So I just hope that as everybody moves forward, we'll continue to support the family and the whole community.
Yeah, everyone involved, because this is a difficult day for not just Hunter Brittain's family, but also the family of former Lonoke County Sheriff Sergeant Michael Davis, as all families are affected by this tragedy. Kelly Ward, former prosecutor, now a defense attorney and law partner at Camps and Ward Law Firm here in Little Rock. I appreciate your time today. Thank you for your insight and expertise.
Thank you, Mitch.
Appreciate it. Let's take another live look here outside the courthouse. This is in Lonoke County. This is actually the Cabot Readiness Center, where you are looking at a live picture right now. This is the courthouse, makeshift courthouse. This is where there has been conversations underway all morning. That verdict coming down just a short while ago of guilty on negligent homicide, not guilty on manslaughter. Of course, this has really been the center point of court operations because of COVID-19, and then also of all the other circumstances with this trial. There were going to be potentially more people. They needed a larger facility, and so they decided to do the trial here at the Cabot Readiness Center in Lonoke County. So what we're specifically in Cabot. Throughout the morning, we have been hearing from the attorneys, we have been hearing from family of Hunter Brittain, the family of Hunter Brittain, saying that they are somewhat frustrated with the decision on the guilty verdict on negligent homicide, but not guilty on manslaughter. And that is because there is a difference in the severity. Negligent homicide is a misdemeanor. It carries a sentence of up to 1 year in jail, and that's exactly what the jury and the judge agreed on today. They agreed on that full 1 year sentence to county jail and a $1,000 fine. They disagreed on the manslaughter, and that is why we have that not guilty verdict on manslaughter, but guilty on negligent homicide. It is interesting to watch all of this somewhat unfold. This is potentially, dating back to some of our records, it would appear that this is the first law enforcement officer in the state of Arkansas to be convicted of a death in the line of duty. So that is something we're still doing research on, but it appears that that is the case. And the fact that that happened here today is certainly historic, and it is a milestone decision by this Lonoke County jury. We have went through the verdict because we learned the verdict about an hour ago. We heard about the sentencing decision. We just heard from Hunter Brittain's family, the family saying that they are somewhat disappointed in the fact that this was not a felony, that Sergeant Michael Davis was not found guilty of a felony, but they believe that the prosecutor, the special prosecutor, did everything he could to at least get that negligent homicide charge as a guilty verdict. As Kelly Ward was just saying a few moments ago, the legal expert, this is a day where every family member, no matter what side you're on, is reliving the pain of June 2021, because the family of Hunter Brittain, somewhat disappointed with the fact that this isn't the manslaughter charge that they originally filed, or the prosecutor filed. You now have Sergeant Michael Davis's family, obviously they've got to be upset that he's been convicted of negligent homicide. So there are certainly a lot of emotions running high on both sides of the table, both sides of the courtroom. Katrin Asaf telling us just a short while ago that we are hoping to hear from attorney Robert Newcomb, that is the former sergeant's defense attorney, waiting now to see if that pans out. Court is in recess until 11 o'clock, but as of right now, we are waiting on that. But as I'm looking at the clock here, it is 20 minutes to 11 o'clock, and we may not have Robert Newcomb within the next few minutes because court will go back into session here at the top of the hour. As we process that information, I think it's important to note that Robert Newcomb, according to our reporter who's in the courtroom, our reporter saying that it appears that Robert Newcomb is going to be filing an appeal. It would appear that that appeal process may be filed here at the top of the hour. If that happens, we will let you know. It is unclear right now if Sergeant Michael Davis will immediately head to a county jail. Very unlikely that he would go to Lonoke County's jail. He would likely go to another detention facility if he goes today. There's a lot of moving parts to this developing story. Of course, it is a story that we will continue to follow both on the air and also online as this story continues to unfold across Cabot and much of the state of Arkansas. A historic decision today by a Lonoke County jury finding former Sergeant Michael Davis guilty of negligent homicide, not guilty of manslaughter. Sergeant Michael Davis, former Sergeant Michael Davis, now sentenced to 1 year in a county detention facility on that negligent homicide charge. It is a historic decision because it would appear that Sergeant Michael Davis will be the first Arkansas law enforcement officer to be convicted in a death in the line of duty. We will continue to follow this breaking news story both on air and online at KARK.com, Fox16.com. For our viewers here in Arkansas, we have live team coverage coming up at noon on all NBC stations. For viewers for Fox 16, we'll see you at 5:30. For now, I'm Mitch McCoy. This has been a special report. Have a good rest of your day.